Hi everyone. Hi everyone. I'm Clare Gallagher. I'm a trail runner, alliance member of Protect Our Winners, and I'm super excited to have Dr. Jude Bayham on today for this episode of The Outdoor State of Mind. He's an assistant professor at Colorado State University in environmental economics. And this episode is brought to you today by Patagonia, who's my sponsor and employer, and they're in business to save our home planet and doing a really good job at it. So we're going to dive right in because Jude has a very interesting job, even though it's in academia. Jude, first off, tell me what you like to do outside, aside from your, research.
Yeah, well, thanks, Claire, for having me, and thanks to Pau and Patagonia for putting this on. I love the outdoors. That's how I got to where I am, or why I wanted to study what I study. But I mountain bike, I fly fish, I ski backcountry. So I love being outdoors, and I love getting my family outdoors.
That's awesome. And you have two young kids, right?
I do, a 2- and a 4-year-old. Yeah.
That's exciting. And you also, do you bike to work every
yes
day? I mean,
rain or shine. Yeah.
Okay,
And
really?
I take pride in that. I rub it in my colleagues' face sometimes, but one of the things I really love about Colorado is it can snow in the morning and then be clear by the time you hit the trails to go to work. So
totally. So for listeners who aren't aware, Jude is based in Fort Collins, Colorado, at Colorado State University. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and we're not that far apart. A couple hours.
Yeah.
But we both suffer from air pollution, which is what we're going to get into a little bit today. First, tell me, what does it mean to be an environmental economist, and like, where are you structured in the school, and like, how does that all work? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I'm formerly in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics. So I'm in the College of Agriculture, and our department covers a wide range of issues, environmental and resource economics issues. So broadly, what economists try to do, and what environmental and resource economists try to do, is apply the tools of economics to try to solve our most pressing environmental and resource issues, like climate change, like land conservation issues. And so largely the tools of economics focus or revolve around trying to understand people's incentives and trying to come up with policies or solutions that are compatible with those incentives. So, sometimes incentives align, but sometimes there are conflicts. So you might have, land developers want to develop a piece of land that others use for recreation. And if there's a conflict there, then we really try to understand, how we can design policies to meet the needs of everyone in society. And so one of the big tools that we tend to use is try to understand the values that people place on these resources in society. And doing so is useful, it's informative, but it also helps us in the policy discussion. So it also helps us, demonstrate to policymakers that, look, people really value this stuff, and this is something that we should conserve for the greater good of society.
Yeah, I know a lot of your research touches on outdoor rec, like whether directly or tangentially, but I find it really cool that you're in the Department of Agriculture. Just like thinking sort of like from an archaic standpoint, I've never really thought of, and a lot of people, I feel like, maybe, and myself included, have like bias that climate or environmental scientists are in one category and the ag group is in another category. And it's really refreshing to be reminded that they're like completely intertwined.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of the issues that the agricultural community is facing are very similar to what the outdoor recreation community is facing, right? I mean, the same climate, or the same stability, at least in climate, that we enjoy when going out to recreate, is critical for growing food and fibers. And so, yeah, so in many instances, we share a lot of the same concerns.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So tell me specifically what you're working on. I know you work on wildfires, but also pandemic. Like, tell me about those areas of your specific research and expertise, and also like what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So I'm happy to get into that, but for a moment, I'm gonna jump back and explain a little bit more about what some folks in our college or in our department do. So,
cool.
One of my colleagues, Rebecca Hill, has actually worked with POW to look at to quantify the impacts of climate change on the snow sport recreation or winter sport recreation industry, and they've estimated that climate change could impact cost over $1 billion a year. John Loomis, a faculty member in our department, has looked at the impact of climate change on national park visitation, Rocky Mountain National Park, and tried to estimate how much people are willing to pay to avoid some of those losses.
Wow.
Dale Manning, Chris Gomans, and Jordan Suter have looked at the impacts of climate change and drought on anything from agricultural outcomes to things like crime and things like that. So we really touch on a wide range of issues. Now, my work largely focuses on how people respond to risk. And so that the two things you mentioned are absolutely things that I study. Wildfire poses a risk to society, poses a risk to individuals, to property, and I've also studied pandemics like large flu outbreaks and the current COVID-19 outbreak, and also things like Lyme disease. And so one thing I try to do is, just like you touched on, try to understand that relationship between people's behavior in response to risk and how that affects their choices whether to engage in certain recreation activities. So one thing we looked at is how people's recreation behavior changes when Lyme disease becomes more prevalent in their counties. And we can estimate that people spent less time on outdoor recreation, and that potentially cost society around $2 to $5 billion a year.
Wow. Well, or is that specifically in the Northeast where
Yes.
Lyme disease
Yes.
is? But okay. That's just crazy. So wait, how do you connect? What type of, are you doing wide surveys of people in the counties where Lyme disease is present, and then seeing if they're spending less money on outdoor rec or time? How does that work?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? And one of the things we try to do, or that economists try to do, is look at some of these costs that might not be apparent, right? So it's not necessarily changes in spending, things like that, but even how people spend their time, right? We recognize that time is valuable, right? I'm right now enjoying a nice conversation with you, but there are other things like we could be doing. It could be working or things like that, right? And so economists have ways to value that time. And so specifically what we do is look at how people, we use a nationwide survey focused on the Northeast, but we look at people's decisions to go engage in outdoor recreation or not. And so we look at that over time, and we see that people spend a little less time. Maybe they're a little less likely to go do that activity, go hiking in some areas when Lyme disease comes to that area. And so we use that to estimate the value of their time based on other information, household income information we observe on the survey respondents, and from that we can calculate those economy-wide impacts.
Wow. And there's a time I've heard of something, what is it, the American
Time Use Survey? Yeah.
Okay, American Time Use Survey. So, and that's run by?
It's run by the census, yeah. So the Census and the Bureau of Labor Statistics basically run this survey that's ongoing since 2003, where they ask people how do you spend 24 hours of your day, minute by minute? And they help you fill out essentially a time diary. And we study those diaries, and from that we can estimate these changes. We correlate that with Lyme disease prevalence. That's data from the CDC. And then we can use that to construct a statistical model to actually estimate these numbers.
Okay, so is that like reliable data? I know.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's pretty reliable. These are two federal agencies that do a lot of surveying, and they're asking people, about how they spent their time yesterday. So when they contact you, it's about how you spent it yesterday. They do it over different times of the day, different days of the week. So we get to see all that variation.
Wow. So like Lyme disease kind of terrifies me, even though I'm from Colorado, but I lived in New Jersey. And I've just heard that's where I went to school. And I have a lot of friends who have like suffered immensely from Lyme disease. And that's an interesting segue into wildfire. Like a little bit. I guess it's not as obvious, but Lyme disease is this sort of like insidious constant that people, especially in the Northeast, suffer from. And that's how I feel about climate change, and especially living in the American West. Like wildfire smoke is just like a constant terror in the back of my mind. We're about to, embark on summer, which I'm so excited about, but so much of summer running is dependent on like, does California have wildfires? Like, can I go outside? So tell me about like how your research works with wildfire and risk, and have you like figured out how much it costs us?
We're working on that. There are certainly estimates out there. The approach we're taking is very similar to that approach that I described with Lyme disease. So we're looking at how people spend their time. And just like we correlated it with sort of the presence of Lyme disease, we can correlate that with really detailed information about air quality and smoke plumes. So NASA actually runs or helps fund a program where they use satellites to detect smoke plumes on a daily basis. And so we can get that data, we can mix it with gridded pollution data over the whole lower 48 for every day of the survey. And we basically look at how people's decisions to go hiking, biking, climbing change when there's smoke present, or running, right? So that's one of the things I really wanted to ask you, Claire, is how the presence of smoke, I know you're clearly aware and concerned about it, but really, how does it factor into your decision making?
Yeah, well, being a professional ultra runner, and I mean, you don't have to be a professional like athlete to know that if you have races scheduled in California, like or anywhere, I mean, in the West, especially in the summer months or in fire season, it's like a crapshoot of whether it's going to happen. And in winter of 2018, like November, I had one race scheduled in San Francisco, the North Face 50. If there are runners listening, you've probably heard of it. And that was canceled due to the campfire, the devastating campfire, which killed like 88 people in Paradise. And then I only had one other race planned the next 6 months, which was this one called Sean O'Brien, 100K in essentially Santa Monica, California. And that was canceled due to the Thompson fire. Oh, Thomas, yeah. In Southern California, Ventura County. So like, luckily I have other things besides just racing, but like, I mean, from a jobs perspective, like that's a really big hit, like to have basically, it'd be like a conference, for you, or like not being able to publish your papers.
Right.
So yeah, I've really thought about where I'm like scheduling races, and like races are less appealing in a lot of ways, which is a huge economic hit to these tiny towns or large towns and the economies around them. And I know like skiers and snowboarders see that so viscerally in mountain towns in the winter when there's not good snow. Yeah. So I haven't like looked at any of the data that you kind of are talking about, like the smoke plume.
Yeah, well, do you think we could put up an image? I think, this is one of the
Oh, sweet.
images that I've constructed for my research.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
We are showing the fraction of the year that these areas experience surface level smoke. So we basically look at these satellite smoke plumes and then look at the elevation in particulate matter at the surface level, and we can sort of deduce which plumes are affecting that surface level air quality, and we can see that it's exactly where you're describing. These areas of California, and then it moves over to the Midwest. But in that sort of Idaho, central Idaho, western Montana area, smoke just tends to settle down there and sit there for large periods of time, and so I think that's an interesting. Frankly, I was surprised to see that, but I think it is something that's important to keep in mind as we engage in our outdoor activities each summer.
What is does this include like particulate matter? I don't know I feel like a lot of PAL listeners know quite a bit about air pollution, but like, is it particulate matter 2.5? And like, what does that mean?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It is 2.5, and that means that it's 2.5 micrometers or less. That's the definition of that particulate matter. And it actually can be composed of lots of different things. But in general, it's one of the criteria pollutants that the EPA measures for Clean Air Act standards, and it's one that we tend to pay attention to a lot. I don't have a similar graphic yet, but we're working on something similar for ozone. It has, there are different ways to model that, but I actually want to highlight one of my colleagues and personal friends recently published a study showing that the ozone levels in national parks can sometimes get as high as major cities, which I think is really concerning, right? We usually think about going to these places as a respite from air pollution in urban areas, but findings suggest that at times it can be just as bad.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Also, is particulate matter, PM 2.5, something that I could see?
No, probably not. Well, I should say no. It's the particles themselves are extremely small. At higher concentrations, you can certainly see a haze in the air.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody who's been in areas affected by wildfire smoke can certainly see that. And when we measure that particulate matter, we see spikes, 10 or 15 times what are sort of normal levels of particulate matter.
Okay, so we can see like the haze from a wildfire, even if it's like 3 states away, is mostly probably PM 2.5.
Yeah. No, and that's actually a great point that you made about it coming from states away. So a lot of our smoke, even in Colorado, it may come, it depends on the atmospheric conditions and the jet stream and that sort of thing, but it may come from California, it may come from Canada even. And these plumes have been shown to travel thousands of miles. And then it just depends on where that particulate matter starts to settle. And yeah, I mean, it's even a problem for people in the East.
Yeah. So what's the deal with this Idaho? Why is Idaho, like central Idaho, so is that, why is that bubble there of central Idaho?
Yeah, so part of it is they have large wildfires, just like many of our western states. But then also part of it is the smoke gets transported, sometimes from Canada, sometimes from other western states, and just the geography of that area. Plumes tend to sit there, so sometimes they get sort of stuck there and they just kind of hang, and that's, I think, what we're able to document with that graphic.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because if you look at like ozone, it could look different because I know ozone on the Front Range in Colorado sits here, and like lots of things sit in the Salt Lake Valley.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So like inversions in the Salt Lake Valley, ozone here. Ozone's a little bit different because it has a lot of fluctuations throughout the day. So, you know, the late afternoon, you know, unfortunately, the times that are often really great to recreate in tend to be high sort of risk times for ozone in particular.
Wow. Okay. So we have a question from someone from San Antonio, and this person's wondering if you, and this is a great question, have suggestions around how your research is best implemented. Is it through local government, state government, federal rules? And like, do you have help? Like how, you know, you're doing like full-time research, how are like politicians supposed to know where to find this and like make sure they don't mess up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great set of questions, and I'll mention, you know, who I think can use it. I think it can be used up and down the sort of policy ladder. So from the federal level, designing federal policy, all the way down to local municipalities. I think one of the things we're trying to emphasize is the importance of smoke and the implicit cost that it imposes on society. So like, you know, I sort of described with the Lyme work, we're going to look at how people change their behavior and how we can, from that, back out sort of an estimate of cost to society. And so what I hope to accomplish with that is to convey to policymakers that, look, there are these additional costs that we should factor into, you know, for instance, wildfire management. And I don't want to suggest that they ignore that at all right now. There are divisions in the Forest Service that are focused on emissions and trying to reduce smoke, you know, doing prescribed burning at certain times. So I think that kind of information can influence local policymakers. And then at the federal level, you know, where we set thresholds for clean air standards, you know, things kind of like that.
So is someone like, say in Colorado, are people contacting you? Or I'm just like, it's so important. I feel that legislators are using robust scientific research, especially this day and age. And like, how does that work? Are there people helping?
Yeah, you're helping, Claire. That's that's why we're having this discussion. No, I mean, I think it's a great question because I tend to write academic journal articles, and unfortunately, those don't get read by everybody. Can you believe it? They're often dry and sterile, and so what we try to do, and I'm trying to be better about this, but really communicate that research out in useful ways, you know, giving it to people in ways they can understand. And I think, you know, just you inviting me on for a conversation like this helps in that. You know, I can certainly do more in trying to communicate to policymakers, but yeah, it's a challenge, and you know, I think we're all trying to work toward the same goal. So
yeah. So you're saying that even people like me who are trail runners or skiers or snowboarders can take your research and not like misquote it, but essentially use it as a way to say, here, like, you know, city council member or like Governor Polis or, you know, whoever, President Trump, like, have you seen this?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I'll even go a step beyond and say, feel free to contact me. You know, if you have questions about it, if you want to use some of our research, you know, most researchers are very open to discussing, communicating about that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we're people too. We get out and do these activities and like our message out. So yeah, I'd say don't hesitate to contact people. So So Claire, can I turn this back around on you a little bit and ask, if you were able to observe the air quality around you when you were running, do you think that would be something of interest to you?
Yeah, I mean, I look up AQI sometimes, and our like handy smartphones often, like the weather app or whatnot, say unhealthy air quality for sensitive groups, and I try and screenshot it every time, and I'm like kind of appalled at how much I've screenshotted it in the last year. And I know someone asked a question about Alaska as well, I think, with regards to your map. And like, I know Alaska can have bad air quality. Sorry, not to change the subject, but
Yeah.
if you wanted to comment on Alaska, but yeah, I'm kind of terrified. Like, I really, really feel for people who have asthma, especially. And it's terrifying that you can develop asthma as an adult due to poor air quality. And it's especially messed up that lower income communities, usually communities of color, are always around horrible, not always, but the stats show they're around bad air quality. Like in northern Denver, there's this, the Suncor refinery, and that's like large, mostly Latino communities. So I guess I just like think of it more holistically, like how could I help document this in a way that could make this like world better and more fair, and I don't want to get asthma.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, well, I was going to suggest this cool little device that I use. It's a little air monitor, and I love taking my kids out on bike rides, and I check the same thing. I live in the same, basic air shed that you do, and there are certainly times on the Front Range where air quality can be bad, and I think that's absolutely the right way to be thinking about this. That there are risks of long-term exposure and developing these ailments, and I want to hopefully prevent. I guess I care more about my kids, but myself too.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk more with you about that, because we can actually use that information in research to try to understand the variation in pollution exposure for different activities. You're a runner, you run all over. I'm sure you're training everywhere. It would be really great to get a sense for the air quality in the areas that you do those activities in.
Yeah, that'd be kind of.
Sorry, I was going to jump on the Alaska thing and say that
I wondered about that too, because like I've been to Fairbanks and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, amazing place. Don't drill there, and it's horrible. There's horrible air quality. I'm like, there's no one. There's so few people up here. How is this possible?
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry, I don't actually know all that much. I tend to focus on the lower 48 because it's where we end up getting a lot of the data measured. But no, I know wildfires are a particular issue. I study wildfire management also besides smoke, and just how we manage fire, and the scale of fires in Alaska is generally orders of magnitude larger than what we're used to in the lower 48. And they burn longer and are larger. And so I think it is a particularly important issue. But I don't have a lot to say on it, unfortunately, at the moment. Okay.
We'll have to get some Alaskan scientists or anecdotal stories. So back to wildfires. Have you been able, I guess you said you've already done this for Lyme disease, but you're still in the process of seeing what type of economic impact there are from these mega fires that we're seeing. And what is a mega fire? And basically, how does this impact, if you could guess, outdoor recreation?
Yeah, no. So I mean, I think the wildfire certainly impacts outdoor recreation through several channels, right? The one we've been talking about is smoke, and I think that can maybe have some of the widest ranging impacts. Other impacts tend to be a lot more local. So you mentioned the Camp Fire earlier, right? That was a really devastating fire because it burned into an urban area, so an area we call the wildland urban interface, where sort of wildlands intermingle with communities, and sometimes that leads directly into communities like Paradise. In terms of what or how we measure those, there's several channels. We can look at the impacts to people who lose homes, business owners who lose business, look at displacement. There are studies looking at that. There are studies looking at the after effects. So that campfire in particular, has still affects that community to this day. So it burned in the town of Paradise. I'm actually from Chico originally, which is a town just in the valley, very close to there. So I had a lot of friends that lost homes up there. And yeah, I mean, it has long-lasting impacts. And so I think trying to understand those impacts is important. And trying to quantify those impacts is important because it really influences policy moving forward and how our firefighting agencies can respond to these incidents.
Yeah. And one thing I struggle with as an outdoor rec user is like sometimes I almost feel it feels like silly. Like, can I talk about this thing, which happens to be my job, but for a lot of people, it's maybe a tangential job or it's your favorite hobby, it's your pastime. Like, can I use this as a way to be like, hey, politician, you should care about this? And one thing that I feel like really does back us up in our like sick capitalistic economy is how big the outdoor rec industry is. It's like $887 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Yeah, $887 billion. And your colleague Rebecca helped with those numbers.
Well, she helped with a portion of that, looking at winter sports, but I believe that estimate comes from the outdoor industry.
Oh yeah, association. And then the like federal government estimated it as well.
Yep.
In that range. Okay. So you're an economist, like, does that really, like, it sounds so weird to be like, yeah, there's money attached to my passion to trail running, but like, do you think that's an effective way to talk about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an incredibly effective way because, policymakers are thinking about trade-offs and like it or not, dollars tend to be the denomination that we tend to talk about when we're talking about policy. And so I think highlighting the importance of the industry to legislators, to anybody is incredibly important. And it is especially in a state like Colorado, where people come here from other areas to engage in recreation. Those are dollars that come into the state to people that run businesses. They buy equipment when they're here. They also buy food and groceries and things like that, and they rent people's homes, things like that, and all of that goes into that value of outdoor recreation, and that, if we look at the trends, that only seems to be growing, as people, there's just really a proliferation of activities to do, and the equipment just gets better and better. It makes the experience more fun. I just recently bought a mountain bike for the first time in over 10 years.
Nice.
And I was blown away. It made me such a better, I'm clearly not that much of a better rider, but it was so much more fun. I could go much faster, so that equipment, I think, is helping to sort of improve the enjoyment that people get out of these activities. And I think all of that stuff contributes to that sort of $800 billion number you mentioned.
Yeah. I guess basically the last question is in your papers, I haven't read through any of your academic papers, I'll be honest,
Totally
or
fine.
in elsewhere, like suggested briefs or something. I don't know how it works. Do you recommend policies? And is that, and if you do, like or if you don't, like how urgent do you feel, especially on the topic of like wildfires in Colorado as we head into summer?
Yeah,
And the
no,
need for legislative action.
yeah, no, it's a great point and question. And you know, sometimes when it's obvious that there's a clear policy that needs changing, yes, we will address that in the papers and maybe write a shorter version that we would call a policy brief. But often it's not that clear, or what a particular study does is look at one component. And so what we really try to do is communicate how it alters maybe that bigger calculation based on like this one component. So, you know, my work, you know, valuing wildfire smoke, for instance, that's going to be one component. You know, we're not actually quantifying the impacts of, you know, people losing homes and things like that. So I think it's part of this bigger story, and really, you know, the more that you talk about these things and you know, understand those bigger pictures, like you were talking about, sort of the holistic picture, I think that's absolutely critical. And so it takes people like you to think about that kind of stuff and then communicate that message out there.
That's awesome. I mean, it's pretty empowering, I won't lie. Yeah, a lot of people can't do what you do. And I think, just thinking of my community, like advocacy or activism can seem really intimidating, and like you need to have a PhD like you do. And what I found, like through POW, is that you don't have to. Like I testified last year in Colorado's Capitol on a climate bill. Essentially, is a very broad bill. So I guess like your papers would never suggest something like this because it covered so many topics. And I was so nervous, and I basically just like told a story about air pollution impacting me. And I quoted some air pollution facts, like possibly from one of your papers. And that added to like the public record. And as you're well aware, like HB 1261 passed, and Colorado's hopefully going to, you know, keep going and make, you know, make the world a better place by enacting climate policies. So hopefully everyone listening feels empowered to, you know, take the summaries of what people like you are researching and like call your reps, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And the thing I just want to tack on there is, you know, having a PhD certainly does not entitle you to talk to policymakers or make you any less nervous than anyone else. And so, you know, and what, you know, what researchers tend to do is like dive really deep into one particular thing and try to understand that thing really well. And sometimes it does take, you know, other people to really see like that bigger picture. And so, you know, having these conversations with you is incredibly useful. Even to, you know, I'm getting a lot out of this. I'm thinking about things. You know, we talk, like, I'm curious what kind of air quality, you know, you experience when you train, and that kind of thing can feed into future research projects. So I think all of that it's part of this whole effort.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing I'll say to people listening is you don't have to be a professional athlete to do the type of activism that Jude and I are talking about. Because so much of this is like just having this mindset of like, we know this science is like this, and then having a story like you love to mountain bike or run, and connecting the dots and calling your reps and saying, you know, a few sentences, or showing up to these public hearings if they ever are public again. And I found like the more I get into climate advocacy, like we really need people. Like there's a lot of people in it, yes, but like the energy from athletes is so refreshing, and I think so needed, because a lot of policymakers are in the weeds and scientists are busy, like you're, you know, researchers and stuff. Like you have like deadlines and things. So I just, I hope I feel inspired after talking to you, and it like is going to make me more motivated to bring more friends in, like, you know, because I've always been kind of shy to be like, okay, you should really do this with me, and now I'm gonna be like, no, you kind of have to. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was really great.
Great. I think that's it. I think we sign off, and there's going to be a video that will hopefully motivate everyone to call your reps.
Great.
Thanks,
Well,
Jude.
thanks again for everybody, to everybody for having me. And Claire, it was great to chat with you.
Wonderful. Super interesting. Calling your reps might feel awkward, but it's really not that bad.
You can really do it from anywhere, pretty much doing anything. It's honestly easier than hamstring curls.
Hey, it's Clare Gallagher for Boulder again. Zip code 80305.
I'm calling again about the CORE Act, urging you to vote for it and to protect public lands and act on climate.